Hello, Issy here from the future. So just before this episode kicks off, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a disclaimer, which is that Chris's microphone decided just to die about 29 minutes in to this episode. So I definitely recommend sticking around for the whole episode because Sarah's insights and the information she gives is so useful. But just for your reference, if Chris seems a little bit quiet towards the end, I didn't silence him. His microphone decided to do that for us. So enjoy, and we'll definitely keep those microphones in good nick for the next episode. Hey there, creative minds and business enthusiasts. Welcome to Looks Like We Made It, the podcast where we dive deep into the dynamic world of video marketing, content creation, and all things creative. I'm Izzy, your guide through this creative journey, wearing two hats, head of production and senior video editor. But I'm not in this alone. Meet the other half of our dynamic duo, my dad Chris, our director and the creative genius behind Howell Media. Why do we still have that in? Together, we're not just a podcast, we're a father-daughter team on a mission to bring you insights, tips, and laughs from the heart of the creative industry. Whether you're a business looking to up your video game or a budding creative hungry for knowledge, this is the place to be. We've got real life experiences, expert advice, and a sprinkle of anecdotes to keep things interesting. This week we are answering the question, why are captions in videos so important? And we're joined by the wonderful Sarah Huntington from the Cap Project. So if you're ready to unlock the power of video, bespoke content and training to achieve amazing results, you're in the right spot. Fasten your seatbelts because this is Looks Like We Made It, where we turn creativity into success, one episode at a time. Let's go.
Fantastic. Excellent.
Hello. You're back. You're back. You weren't at the last episode.
No, I'm back now.
You ran off, but
I'm here now.
We have
welcome,
a guest.
Sarah.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no, it's our pleasure. And how are you today? This is
I'm
your
good.
podcast debut, isn't it?
I am very nervous, I'm not going to lie, but I'm here.
Oh,
so that's
wow.
the first step.
Don't be
completed.
nervous.
No, seriously, we're just a pair of chimps with microphones, aren't we? So don't worry about that. So diving right in, tell us a little bit about you and how you came to be the Cap Project.
Yeah, so I live in the northeast, but I'm not originally from the northeast. I'm from Chester in the northwest, and I grew up as a child of deaf parents. So I've been aware of captioning my whole life, but then it kind of, not necessarily by design, but kind of became a part of my professional career as well. I spent a long time working as a professional captioner, and then I moved into website content creation and content strategy. But captioning has always been a part of every kind of work I've done, which I'm sure I will talk about in more detail. And last year I decided to formalise that a little bit and turn it into something real that I could share with people and talk about and kind of indulge my really nerdy passion for captioning, basically, and give me excuses to talk about it more often, because as you'll learn, I can talk about it forever.
You're in the right place.
So the Cap Project, it was born last year, but I would say it's kind of been in the pipeline for much longer than that. And the aim of it, in a nutshell, is to raise the profile and raise the bar for video captioning. So it's about informing and educating people as to why captions are important, and then getting into the practical details of what it actually looks like to deliver good captions, what quality looks like, what people should be thinking about, what tools and tricks they can use to make sure they're delivering the best possible experience for all the different types of people who watch or listen to things and use captions.
Wow.
Oh.
Hey, Jinx.
Make a wish. Well, that's amazing, because I think that's, for us in production, obviously you see on social media, you see the rise of how a large proportion of people watch videos without sound, and that in itself is a development that's happened over even the past couple of years. But that in itself has put pressure on us as production to make sure we've got captions, make sure they're spot on, and often when the words are wrong and stuff like that, there's little kind of frustrating things. But that in itself is, I think a lot of people are still learning how to kind of work with them and how to, actually do them correctly.
I mean, in a nutshell, imagine you didn't know the difference between kind of good captioning and kind of bad captioning. I mean, it's in a sense like, firstly, it's desirable to have it there because for a number of reasons. Do you think that it's to support kind of people who need it, so people who are deaf or whatever background they have, or whether it's just there for everybody, so they've got the choice to read it as opposed to listen to it? But how does that work with automated captions as an example, which when you see those on YouTube, you always think, oh, they're a bit they're a bit hopeless.
Yeah.
I'm sort of waffling through this, aren't I?
No,
might
I got
have to cut this
Keep
bit.
going. No, you're getting
but
there.
I suppose in a nutshell, I just want to understand like what good captioning is, what it looks like.
Yeah. So
we got there in the end.
We got there in the end. So part of the CAP project is about raising the bar, and that part is really important because the bar, I think, for a long time has been just have some captions is better than non-captions, which I would agree. So having some is better than none, but that bar is far too low. And in terms of the range of people who use captions, I think there are 18 million people in the UK who are deaf or have hearing loss. But of the people who use captions, people who are deaf or have hearing loss make up about 20%. So 80% of the people who use captions on a regular basis are using them for a whole range of different reasons. You know, people are on the bus when you can't be bothered to get your headphones out, or you're watching it when you shouldn't be and you're in a meeting and all of those sorts of things, or you're doing a night feed and you've got a baby and you don't want to wake up the rest of the household, all those sorts of things. So there's a million different reasons why people might use them. I think the critical thing to say is that captions benefit a lot more people than you might think. They are useful for a lot of people, but they are still critical for that 20% of people. So it's not a case of, actually captions are just, for everyone. Yes, they help everyone, but that audience for whom are reliant on captions, it's still important to make that distinction. And I think in terms of kind of raising the bar, the automated captions means that we see a lot more content that has captions now, which is great. But that also means we see a lot more content that doesn't have great captions. And the main distinction, I would say, between good and bad is captions are bad if you notice them. If you don't notice them, if you can watch a video and understand without the sound on, and you can understand the message, you can understand all the kind of whatever it is they're trying to say, and you know who the people are who are talking, and you feel like you've got the full message, the full experience, those captions are good. But if you get to the end and the main thing you've noticed is the captions, and your brain is trying to do the work to fill in the gaps. So everything, all the minor decisions around captioning, which some of the work that I do, which is about what good looks like, is there's some steps. There are some things you should always be thinking about. This covers things like the size, the placement, the font you use, and all those sorts of things. Every element of that, a bit like every element of any other kind of video editing, all those tiny decisions are about cognitive load when it comes to captioning. And the aim of good captions is to minimise the additional cognitive load you're asking your audience to put in order to consume your content. So if the decisions around captioning are either not there at all and you're just reliant on whatever the automated transcription has just kind of delivered to you, or you've kind of prioritised creativity over clarity, which happens if I start talking about karaoke subtitles on Instagram, I will be here for a long time. But that sort of thing where actually it becomes it's almost quite stressful to watch because you're having to do a lot of work to read, text that's all in capitals, that's flashing, that's got colours, and all those things are adding load. And the more of that load you add, the more you take away from what those people are taking away from your actual content and your messaging. So that is, in a nutshell, to use your phrase, the basic difference, I would say, between good and bad is really good captions. You should barely notice them.
That's really interesting.
Yeah,
so just a quick, sorry, I'm going to jump in with it. So say, just using YouTube as an example, they're automated captions. Are they presented, in your experience and expert view, are they presented well?
They're quite, in terms of the actual, the sort of visual side of it, you mean? Yeah, I think they tend to be quite small. I don't think they're quite restrictive in terms of positioning. So if you just rely on the auto captions, they will always be at the bottom of the screen. They're reasonably small. Whereas if you do your own, obviously you have more more choice as to how you position them and what you do. So they tick the box in terms of they don't go in for sort of major creativity. It's white text on a black background, which is most of the time the ideal. But the biggest challenge is around the accuracy. And, you can guarantee, well, you can't guarantee accuracy, really. You can get to even 90%, 95% accuracy when it comes to speech recognition. But if that 5% you're missing, or even the 2% you're missing, is the name of your business, the name of the person who founded your business, some key terminology that people who should want to work with you or might be interested in your work need to know or use, then that 2% is actually massive, and it has a big impact, not only on what people understand about you and your business or your work, but there's also a kind of a reputational thing in there as well. I think, I'm more aware of this as somebody who's clearly obsessed with captioning, that I would pay more attention to those things. But I think, well, if you can't be bothered to put the effort in to correct your own name in your video, why should I think that your offer is for me?
Totally. And that's something, and that's weirdly how I, as an editor, that's the mindset I go through. And I mean, like, I'm always preaching that, people should go out and just make stuff in the spur of the moment. They should use whatever kit they've got available. It doesn't matter. It's just about the idea to start off with and all this stuff. But then there is the sort of basic etiquette, if you will, that goes within creating your own content and creating content for a brand. And I'm always quite sort of, we're very much into the attention to detail at Howell Media, so I'm always going through those captions. And it is often sometimes these platforms that do the automated captions in particular, like LinkedIn or Instagram, whatever, they aren't really, maybe at this point, technology isn't quite good at picking up different dialects, I think, at this point. Speaking from the Northeast, I imagine there's a lot of people with Geordie accents or Macam accents or, Teesside accents that might think, okay, well, this has just completely said the wrong thing. Yeah. But I think I'm lucky that I sound like a Google Assistant, so that comes in really handy. But it's still, whenever I go on, it'll always assume my name has Zs, so I always have to swap that out. It'll assume Howell is spelled Howl, not Howell with, EWL. So I always go through and manually change those. Mm-hmm. But is there a way that people can do it in a quick, is there a way people can approach it where it doesn't feel like a chore, where it doesn't feel like oh God, I have to go through it all now?
Yeah.
And
this is the really tricky thing with captioning, I think, because when I first started the Cap project, I got the sense a lot of people who spoke to me were like, can you just tell me a really easy way to do it that's really quick, it's going to be really good? And the answer to that is there isn't one. Really, the main question, I guess, is how much, well, it's not a question, but so much as you need to build it into, if you know you're going to create some content, captioning needs to be part of that content creation. Mm-hmm. So if it's going to take you time at the end, that needs to be built into the time you allow for creating that content. One thing I would say is that there are things that you can look out for. I always say when you check automated captions, you're not just checking for typos. You're not checking for things that are spelt, that have been mangled. You're looking at detailed things like your name not being spelt with a Z. It's not a typo. It's not going to come up in a spell check, but it's wrong because it's not your name. So, and there are things, there versus there, THEIR. Be funny if I spelled that wrong, wouldn't it? Or versus other variations of that. They're not wrong. So they won't come up if you just run a quick spell check. So, running a spell check is a good thing to do, but it's not the only thing you can do. But what I would say is if you are regularly editing captions that are around the same sort of content with the same kind of people and the same names, for instance, if you know that your name will be spelt wrong, basic things like doing a find and replace before you even start watching through, if you know that that's quite likely and you're going to have to change it 50 times, do that quick find and replace, or whether that means you export the transcription, do the find and replace and bring it back in. If you know that there are regular things that come up, keep a track of them, keep a note of them so that you can just go in and get them out of the way before you do anything else. And then you can watch back through for anything else that you might have missed. Because on the flip side of that, if there are things you're aware of, you will look out for them more and you might miss things where actually there needs to be a comma there because it's too much. So when I used to do TV captioning or subtitling a long time ago, we used to try not to split a sentence over more than 3 captions because it's too much for people to... There's a lot of stuff. You have to hold it in your brain for the duration of that sentence until you get to the full stop. So sometimes if you're captioning, you might look at it and think, actually, that sentence has gone on for 16 captions. I should probably put a full stop in there or a comma in there. And again, they're not things that are going to come up in a spell check. But I think the short answer to that is there aren't really any shortcuts, but there are ways, and part of the work that we do is to help build in some processes for that stuff, so it just doesn't just feel like people are like, oh, at the end of this, I know I need to go through the captions, but I'm not really sure what I'm trying to do. I know I'm fixing typos. I know I'm looking for wild errors that are going to distract people, but what else should I be doing? And then having a bit of a process in place for that. So, for instance, if you guys had like your own little caption style guide almost, which is like, we don't run over more than 3 captions, or we always use this size or this placement. It's difficult to be really fixed on those things because it will vary a bit depending on the content, depending who's talking, depending on the colours, all of that sort of stuff. But having your own little sort of frame of reference and your own set of things that you know you always need to check for can help speed things up a little bit, so you're not quite kind of going in with a blank slate every single time.
I mean, I think it's definitely on more of our clients' radar than it used to be. I mean, certainly sort of perhaps like our local authority clients, so councils, projects we do for them, they now ask the captions are included in the deliverable for the project. Perhaps some of the kind of art Art Council England, Heritage, Lottery Fund type work we do, they also you know, it's part of the initial conversation we have with them. But I don't think it's on a wider, you know, from a just like commercial work. I don't think it's quite on people's radar
it's
yet.
It's often something we have to ask if they want it. So it's like we have to begin that conversation.
So the other thing is what I was going to say to you. Do you have like a set of rules? Do you have like a handbook or a kind of a cheat sheet that you say, right, is that essentially your?
Yeah, well,
have I just undone your
promo
business
for my website?
Okay, right. Okay.
I've got I have a sort of new mini website that I'm going to be launching this week, and on that I have it's like a 10-step list, which is, and again, it's not, because it's quite hard to be really prescriptive because there should be an element of variation depending on the project. But there are kind of 10 things that you should be thinking about, and that they're things like, you know, do the captions look, are they visible enough against whatever the colour background is? Do they feel small? Are they genuinely representing everything that's happening in that video? So if you included sounds or descriptions or people's names and those kind of things. So yeah, I do have kind of a set of rules. You can, I think, so there are some kind of guidelines and things. So like if you look on the BBC and Netflix, for instance, they've got really kind of strict guidelines for the people who do their captioning. And as part of the early setup of the CAP project, I spoke to quite a few kind of video creators about what they do and where the need was. And a lot of people were saying, we sort of feel like we know, but we don't really know.
I would fall squarely into that category.
Which is why this sort of 10-step thing it's just a prompt really for you to just, when you're doing those checks, to think, have we thought about all these things, and does it, because a lot of it is about how it feels for a viewer. And the number one thing that I would say, which is a spoiler because it is one of the 10 things, is that watch your content back without the sound on. And because it never fails to surprise me how few people who create video content will do that, because they will watch back the captions, but they will still have the sound on. So they're still sort of piecing the two together. So you don't quite get a full sense of what the experience is like. So that is the number one thing I would say to anyone who's added any captions to video. Even if you just bung the auto captions on and you think they're fine, watch it back without the sound on, and I'll guarantee you'll realise they're actually not.
That's really interesting. The other thing I was going to say is as well that I've got two things really. As a creative person, there's a real kind of urge to make your captions as funky and hey, everyone does them in kind of dark with white writing at the bottom of the page in Helvetica or something that's easy to read. Why don't we do ours in like at the top in let's get jazzy. Let's do them at the top in bright orange, or animate them to go round the screen or whatever.
Yeah, or you have like CapCut where you get emojis popping out with every word, and
and that's not the thing, is it?
No.
But the other thing as well is that again, as a creative and as a creative filmmaker, almost like we never factor in captions when we're making content. Mm-hmm. So it's always overlaid over the top. It's always like it's an addition. Mm-hmm. It's like and almost like, oh, that's a shame. You know, I don't mean that disrespectfully. Almost like, oh, we've had to, that shot now isn't clean and pure because it's got this thing on. Mm-hmm. And it's got me thinking, just this conversation we're having now, actually, the way you're framing a shot, the way you're thinking about a shot, the way you actually could say, well, we could maybe almost like make it more of an elegant elegant thing to look at.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're speaking my language, Chris.
Oh, thank you.
I think that there's the other work that I do alongside captioning is I work in kind of web content, and one of the things as a content designer in that space is to get people to involve the content designers as early as possible in the development of any content or any website, because you can't put your lorem ipsum in there and get to the end and find that actually you haven't got space, or you're actually creating a page for entirely the wrong thing. And captioning is the same thing. The dream is that any content that's created from the beginning, you know that captions are going to be involved. And it might be that you work on a project and it doesn't actually change anything about the way that you're going to develop that content, but you're just aware of it, and you know that the bottom quarter of the shot, for instance, you shouldn't put any key information in there because it's going to be obscured or whatever. But just having that in your mind when you're doing any creative work would be so powerful, because otherwise it does just become something that gets bolted on at the end. And by that point, you're at the point where everyone's like, let's just get this done now. Let's get it wrapped up, whack the captions on. There's an amazing project that was done a few years ago at the University of Sheffield that a friend of mine, Beth Evans, was involved in, and they looked at kind of creativity in captioning, and that there are other ways to be creative beyond having like emojis and kind of whizzing your words around the screen, and that involves the actual choice of words you use when you're describing sounds, all those sorts of things. And they looked specifically at suspense and how you convey suspense in captions for deaf audiences. It's fascinating. There's a video summary of the work that they did, and I think they involved some people from the RNID in it as well, and it's brilliant. One of the specific things I always remember is that they talked about JAWS and the captions in JAWS, because if you think, like I said, 20% of people who use captions are deaf or have hearing loss, which means the frame of reference for descriptions of sounds is different. So if you're using really flowery language to describe what part of the string section is making a part of the soundtrack, you have to think about who is this caption actually for, and what do they get from the words that we're using. And this the example they gave from Jaws was about the theme. Thank you. I was just thinking, am I going to sing this? No. Exactly that. But there were various ways that it had been described previously. And the work, I'm kind of wildly summarising the huge amounts of work that they did. But the thing that was never said or never indicated in the captions that described that sound was that the shark is coming. And it describes the instruments. It describes the kind of sense of, doom or whatever. But it never... That's what other people get from that. That's what I get when you make that noise.
Thank you. Well, they hired me for the
shark
live
is
action
outside the door.
I think and that's fascinating, because anyone who knows Jaws and anyone who knows Steven Spielberg will know that the I think it's the lack of budget, or basically they didn't show the shark. They used the music instead to specifically.
And it's super effective.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. As you heard by my rendition, I will not do it again, but you can rewind if you want to hear it. And that in itself is 20% of people who were lilistening to that, or not listening to that, unfortunately, wouldn't have been able to experience that in the same way.
I guess once you've seen it a few times, you get, you'd see the caption that describes that musical interlude or whatever, and presumably they use the same one every time, so there's an association there. But you're still having to do the work to put those two things together. And there's loads more work that they did as part of that study. It's really, I would recommend anyone to have a look at it, because it's creativity in captioning, but in a different way, and that's about building it into the whole process and holistically thinking about the experience of somebody who's watching the captions, rather than thinking kind of piecemeal about the individual the bits of editing that you're doing, thinking at the end, thinking about it as a whole process and as a significant part of the experience that you're creating as part of your video content.
Well, it's like a unique way it's like an alternative way of storytelling, isn't it, for the same story, and giving, and everyone deserves to have that initial experience from the same film.
Because so much of captioning is about, or should be about, equity of experience, and that if you're giving somebody a video and the captions are 80% accurate, you're giving them such a compromised experience. And you would never do that with any other kind of content. You wouldn't publish a book that was 90% accurate and go, well, that'll do, they'll get the gist.
Yeah,
because you wouldn't get a second book if you did that. And if a publisher put out loads and loads of books that were all like that, you'd think maybe they're not quite on the ball. Maybe.
And in business, you'd never disregard 20% of your potential paying punters, would you?
Exactly.
And I think that and I know we talked about this a lot when we grabbed coffee, but I think for people who run businesses or entrepreneurs or charities who listen to this podcast, granted there is the unfortunate assumption as well that all deaf people, they kind of get, or people who are hard of hearing get put into one big sort of like collective like crowd, and they go, well, all of them will have captions, and there we go, we've ticked that box. But obviously it's a lot more varied, and it's a lot more kind of complex, nuanced than that. And I think obviously with your background, having both parents who are deaf as well, that gives you an incredible insight into how that works. But what can people do to support that 20%, to make their content more accessible to people who are hard of hearing or deaf?
I think the top line thing that I would say about accessibility generally is that it's not about technology, and it's not about checklists. It's about people, it's about experiences, and it's about choice. So what we should be doing is understanding people's needs and offering a range of ways that they can consume content, rather than saying we've done this, job done, we've ticked the box for deaf people, we've ticked the box for blind people, because you will never tick that box, because the range of experiences of people who fall into those broad categories are so wide. So BSL interpreting, for instance, is obviously a huge support for a lot of people, a lot of deaf people, but not all deaf people sign. Not all deaf people have great levels of literacy, but some do. So my parents are very disparate in that my mum grew up and went to a deaf boarding school, and
there we go.
I was going to
start from my mum.
Yeah, so my mum went to a deaf boarding school. She signs. She's spends a lot of time in the deaf community. She's taught sign language. My dad had a very different experience. So he went to a hearing school. He worked in a hearing environment for a long time. He didn't get a hearing aid until he was 11, I don't think. He learnt to sign quite late in life. And as a family, we always used a blend of a bit of lip reading, a bit of sign language, all these sorts of things. So they have quite different needs in terms of the things that help them. So, if we watched a video and there was solely a BSL interpreter on screen, my dad would be sort of using a bit of that and watching what's going on and trying to lip read the people on screen. If there were captions as well, that would also help. But if it was only captions, my mum would maybe say, oh, actually having a BSL interpreter would really help. But that varies from day to day, because some days she'll think, actually, I'd rather watch captions. It's the choice, and it's very difficult to say. It's always challenging when you see things that say we're fully accessible, because I always think, how do you know? Because you don't know who's going to come and what their needs are. So the important thing is to offer choice. So you have captions, and then if you're able to provide that facility, you have BSL interpreting, and you have those options, and not saying we've done one thing, so we've met that need, because you won't have done, and you wouldn't, not, the rest of your audiences, you don't give them only one way. They might be able to watch it on mobile, they might be able to watch it on their tablet or on the move or whatever. So people always have options for different things now. And if you try and say, you can only use this option, you're really kind of putting people into one box, when actually there's people's experiences and people's needs are so broad. But yeah, that is, sorry, that's very rambly.
No, that's fine.
I might want to cut some of that out. But I think that
really
is the broad thing, is that it's not about being prescriptive and thinking that you've done it.
Yeah,
in the same way that making a building accessible isn't about putting a ramp outside.
Totally,
completely.
yeah.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because I think it's about it's got to be at a cultural level where you've got to be a believer, haven't you? And ultimately, you can't try hard not to be a certain. Oh well, I've ticked this box. I'm not going to behave this certain way just because that's it. I've now fulfilled that kind of obligation. This is something you've just got to say, well, actually, it's a good thing to do for it's a good thing to do commercially. As a business owner, immediately I'm thinking, well, actually, yeah, we should be, it shouldn't be a hassle. It should just be part of what we do. I mean, we run quite it's fine. We run quite a sophisticated production system, production schedule, involves lots of people at times, and actually, it wouldn't be that hard to implement this into our workflow, and almost sort of like have clients want to opt out as opposed to opting in, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously we've talked about the sort of deafness and hearing loss side, but broadly, 70% of video content is watched without the sound on. Yeah. On social media, that goes up to 85%.
Wow.
Which is extraordinary.
Because you know, the amount of scrolling I do, not to talk for anyone else, when I should be asleep, I don't have the sound on. And so if you don't have the captions on, all those people are just gone immediately.
I know,
so whatever
I do.
it is that you're trying to share, people are just gone. So there is that huge side that's about accessibility. But often when people think about captions, they think of it as a part of accessibility that's over here that they need to do. But actually, if you do that, you're sidelining so much in terms of reach and opportunity to connect with people and to share your messaging with people in a million different situations. At the core of that are people who really rely on captions for any kinds of access. But actually, the percentages and the amounts of people who watch video with captions, it's almost a no-brainer when you think about it. And it's not we should do this extra thing because it would be a really nice thing to do because it would help this small group of people. It's not that at all. It's so much bigger than that, and it's so much wider. And even that it's not about doing a nice thing. It's about doing the right thing and aiming for equity and parity of experience for anyone who might be a potential client or a potential customer or anything like that.
I agree.
Fascinating, and I think so. I promise that we could talk about this literally all day. So
Told you.
One quick question about your dad. Did your dad feel do you think he felt like isolated, or that you know because of his experiences of kind of his formative years, whatever? Did he feel and to put some context to that, my dad went deaf, and unfortunately we lost him at the end of 2023, but there was definitely he was quite isolated by his deafness because he lost his he went deaf as he got
he couldn't
older.
Really engage, could he, with people in the same way?
I was just interested.
Yeah.
We're going off
No. I mean,
tangent,
would be a whole other. I could do a whole other podcast on that.
Okay.
But I think there are elements of it. I think the main thing I would say is that if you think about the kind of social model of disability, in that isolation and that sense of disengagement doesn't come from the person. It comes from the fact that the world is not designed to be open and engaged with people who have additional needs like that, and the world makes those people an exception and means that they have to work harder to do things. And I think there's an element of that inevitably comes with isolation, because you're having to do things you weren't having to do before, and you're feeling like you've now become someone that things aren't for, and that in itself is very isolating, and it's the fault of all of us, really, in the world that we live in, and the culture in which we live in, which says that these things are an exception, and that you go to an event and they say, oh, we've got a loop system, so we've covered the deaf box, and you think, well, that's absolutely useless for both of my parents. It doesn't make any difference. No. So you haven't actually done anything, and if anything, by doing one thing and thinking you're done, you've made it worse, because you've sort of said, oh, we've thought about it and it's quite easy, so we've done it. I think you actually haven't. And I almost wish you'd done nothing, because there's that element of we've sort of made some steps and then we've gone, that's fine. And that stuff, from an emotional point of view, is really difficult. And I think that's the thing that's always stuck with me, being kind of growing up. So my brother is hearing as well. And growing up as we did, and my parents are very independent, they're very capable, they're incredible people, and they've had to deal with an awful lot in a million different ways. And across the two of them, obviously their experiences are very different, they've had to deal with different challenges. But they are incredibly capable people. But seeing the consistent small barriers and small things that come up, that is the stuff that really sticks with me. And I think all the work that I do, whether it's captioning or content design, all of it is about thinking about the person who is consuming that content, watching that video, reading that webpage. Can they do the thing that they want to do? And have we made it more painful? Have we made them work harder? Have we made them feel different in order to do that thing? And if you have done any of those things, like, that's the stuff that I want to erase, because there is when I was captioning TV programmes, for instance, if you knew something like Coronation Street, as a side note, if you ever want to recruit people for a pub quiz team, get people who work in captioning because they have watched so much random stuff. They are very good for random knowledge.
Well, you're hired.
Yeah. But watching a lot of kind of Coronation Street, for instance, you think, oh, this is Corrie. It's like, it's a soap. It's not important. But if somebody, whether they're deaf or not, has those access needs and needs the captions on when they watch Corrie, and they've been out of work and they've had a rubbish day and they've had to deal with 3 or 4 things during the same day that have been a challenge because their hearing's not great or because they've got an ear infection and they're tired and they get home and their favourite programme, they can't watch it because the subtitles are rubbish. Yeah. That has a massive impact on people's on how they feel about themselves, how they feel about the world around them, and all of those things. And it might seem small, but it isn't, in the same way that those decisions that you make about your captions and whether you use the flashing things or whether you use capital letters or not, all those things feel really small. But cumulatively, the impact is really significant, because if you, if somebody came across, obviously this wouldn't happen with your content because you're top of the tree when it comes to all this stuff.
I'm very nervous about sharing a snippet now.
We like we mentioned when earlier, every day is a school day, and
totally. There's a lot we could learn. Absolutely, and I think the and really one my final question anyway. I mean, we could literally. No, did we?
So, I can't remember. Sorry. I think I was just going to say,
yes, go for it.
If someone came across your content or your business and thought, or saw you interviewed on the news or something and thought, great, they seem like great people, and then came to your website and tried to watch a video that was about your work and it wasn't captioned and they couldn't access it, that they've suddenly gone, oh, actually, I was looking forward to that. I thought I might engage with them, and then you've basically pulled the shutters down on them. And I think the wider point in that is about, it goes back to the thing about it not being about single bits, single tasks or check boxes, and that it's about the holistic experience. And if you are accessible in one area and not in another, that is really challenging. So this is a slight tangent, but if I think about going to a GP surgery, for instance, my parents and as a family, we had a continual challenge with anyone who has any sort of additional needs. Generally will know that booking appointments and NHS processing things can be quite challenging. But going to the GP and the name being of whose appointment is next and which room to go in being said on the loudspeaker has been an entire thing that's come up about 50,000 times in my 40 years on this planet. And now a lot of GP surgeries have changed that, so the name pops up on a screen. But it pops up on the screen in between information videos that might be about healthy eating or what immunisations your kids need, or how to book a smear test. And if those videos aren't captioned, you've gone part of the way and you've gone, okay, we'll make it easy for you to get to your appointment, but we're still not quite going to give you full access to everything that you need. And again, it won't be full access for everyone because some people would need BSL rather than anything else. But it's about thinking about the whole experience. When someone walks into that GP surgery, what interactions do they have? Where are they when those interactions are happening? And what would make it easier? And what barriers have we put in place without even realising it? And how can we take those away? Rather than just kind of in an isolated thing going, oh, we'll fix that thing. Because actually it's the cumulative impact of the small barriers that each individually seem tiny, but if every single day you're having to chip away, or you just got really used to having to, well, I can go and do this thing, but I'm going to have to think about whether or not I'll be able to do X, Y, Z. That's really exhausting. And we collectively, as creators and as people in business, we have a responsibility. Everybody has a responsibility to minimise that additional cognitive load that we were talking about at the beginning.
Totally. Absolutely, and that was what I was going to say. Was my question?
Hit us with the question.
I know, it's great. I'm building up to it, but how can? It's a 2-pronged question. So again, building up to it. In the first instance, how can businesses like ours, creatives, people in the creative industry, video production companies, etc., how can they support people? How can they make that start? What can we do to forward that and raise that awareness and keep that going? And also, how can people work with you? So how do you offer your expertise, and how can people learn from you and get involved?
I'd start at every doctor's surgery in the country.
Yeah, I was going to say, you've got your work cut out for you.
Yeah, I think, the important thing to say, there are a lot of people who work in this space already. There's loads of amazing captioners who do incredible work. There's also a lot of accessibility professionals who do a lot of this work. And a lot of my aim is to also raise the profile of their work as well. So it's not necessarily saying to people, you should never, or you should always use a professional captioner, for instance, because there are instances where that is actually the right thing to do. It's about people understanding what the different options are, what they should be thinking about, and factoring this into their broad processes. So the work that we do at the CAP project, I say we, it's just me.
That's okay.
We always the royal we. So things like this really help. So any opportunities to kind of platform what we're doing and to talk about this stuff, because there are so many things that we've talked about that people just aren't aware of, and it often comes in the bracket of let's have a conversation about accessibility, but it's so much wider than that. It's all about reach, it's all about openness, about understanding how people experience content now compared to how they did 10 years ago. So yeah, platforms and opportunities to speak. I can do some work where I work with a specific organisation about what they do, what their captioning processes are, whether it's something that they're already captioning loads of content and they're just finding it's really time consuming and they feel like the results are inconsistent, or they just want to bring a bit more clarity and a bit more consistency to the work they do. So, and again, that's not about finding a way that is going to dramatically reduce the time it takes to do it. It's just about bringing a bit of structure and some kind of guidelines around what you're doing to help you feel like the work that you're doing. And so if anyone in your business captions a video, you know that it'll be to the same standard and they're following the same steps, which is often not the case. So, yeah, and kind of opportunities to get involved in training, whether it's training about video editing, anything else, and kind of just getting the conversation going and keeping it going around captioning and why it's important, and not having it something that only comes up when people go, oh, did you see the hilarious error that was on that video? Which actually no one ever remembers the video themselves. They only ever remember the error. So I can't remember what the first part of your question was.
No. I think you've answered it. To be fair, I think it's like it is fascinating, and there's a lot that we can learn from. There's a lot we can take away, and I feel like every production company and every business probably that creates content in one way or another, we all have a bit of knowledge, but maybe not the same knowledge, and
we have a dangerous amount of knowledge.
And we all kind of do different things in different ways, and actually there has to be some consistency there in terms of how we all, maybe as a collective, as allies in business, in content creation, in the creative industry, there's a responsibility on people like us in what we do, where we stick stuff on massive screens, we stick stuff on people's phones,
stick stuff.
we
technical term.
we emblazon the screens of
stick stuff on massive screens.
All right, now you've piped up, but to round off, and thank you so much, Sarah. That was absolutely fascinating. Like I said, and when we grabbed coffee, I'm pretty sure I could have spoken to you all day, but you were desperate to. After a while, we were like, "Oh my god!"
Can I just say one extra thing that I haven't really mentioned around the social media stuff, which is if people take nothing away from this, except this. Like, just because there are loads of options as to what you can do with your caption doesn't mean you should use all of them at the same time, because it's great that you can now go on and do your captions on Instagram and whatever, but keeping it simple is the main thing. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Oh, totally.
Exactly.
I mean, you go on stuff like CapCut, etc., and it's literally like it's kind of like eye melting a little bit when you watch some of these captions and you think, "Oh, I've got a headache now."
The essence of good design is when you can remove everything and what's left is still functional.
Exactly.
Oh, I feel like you need that tattooed.
Should have said that at the start. We could have finished that with
I was going to say, round it off. So I normally, I finish off with a fun question. Normally, I just go into it and guess and figure one out as we go. But I actually have come prepared.
Oh.
I've actually done the work,
honoured.
and so we have a lot of different options here. But the one that I'm going to ask you is, if you could swap lives with anyone for a day, real or fictional, who would it be?
Oh, that's a bit slimy.
That's a big one, isn't it?
Okay. Alive.
Anyone.
Well, a fictional. You've got to drop fictional.
Okay, fine. Real then. Okay, if you could swap lives with anyone for a day, who would it be?
Barack Obama.
Interesting, yeah. I could get on board with that.
Oh, you've gone high. I was thinking, I don't know.
Because compared to Barack Obama, I'm like an amoeba, and he's like a...
Yeah, that is true.
I just think in this world... Oh, God, this could be a whole different...
You've hit on a podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Don't
open that door.
That's
nice.
That's what I
Okay, God,
that's really hard.
I
think in the spirit of all the stuff we've been talking about, I'm more in the like minutiae of someone's day to day, and like who's day-to-day specifics would I want to get involved in. I'm going to channel my sort of 10-year-old self, and me and my family are all big Everton Football Club fans.
Oh, okay.
Chris has left the room. He's checked out. My husband is a Newcastle fan. I'm just going to put that, and all of his family are Newcastle fans. But I would probably say that I would want to step into the shoes of someone who plays for Everton, so that I could live out my childhood dream and go to training and play in a match.
That is amazing. That is amazing.
I mean, we could do another podcast about Everton, but
Well,
bring me back another day for that.
I will do. Well, mine I think would just be someone who is really, you know, when you look at people in the Olympics and you think, how can the human body do that? Like a gymnast or something, like people who literally can just, like Simone Biles or someone who literally can just fly around the room. And I hurt my knees going up the stairs, so I would love to do that. But fascinating. Oh, go on then.
Now we've introduced football into the...
Oh, here we go. The whole lineup for Nottingham Forest.
Could I be Brian Clough for a day?
You could actually, yeah. I mean, we'd have to put your face on all the pictures in this office. You'd be Brain Clough. Anyway, so, right.
People I know are going to listen to this and be like, of all the people in all the world, you basically went for Seamus Cole. But my dad would be very proud, so that's what I have to do.
Oh, well, that's good. And before I use my outro, which I do have, which is great, where can people find you? How can you be reached online?
So the best way is to follow the Cap Project UK on LinkedIn. There's a few videos up there that talk about what I do already, and then I wrote a blog last year for Captioning Awareness Week, which is on there, and I've got a new website coming which will have that, and my 10 steps of quality captioning as well. So LinkedIn is the best place to find me.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
That is a wrap on this episode of Looks Like We Made It. Thanks for tuning in, whether you're here for the video marketing insights, the storytelling magic, or just to hear me and my dad talk shop. I said shop, remember. We drop new episodes every other Tuesday, so hit that follow button and stay tuned for more tips, real life experiences, and behind the scenes stories from the world of content creation. If you want to keep the conversation going, you can find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our website. Just search for Howell Media and say hi. We'd love to hear your thoughts, answer your questions, or even have you on the show. If you've got a great story to share or fancy joining us for a chat just like Sarah, drop us a message. We're always looking for inspiring guests, again, just like Sarah. Until next time, keep creating, keep storytelling, and remember, every great piece of content starts with an idea, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye for now.